the most important event that ever took place on this planet actually happened in India. And that most important event in the history of Earth is the fact that God came to this world and sort of landed. The landing field was India. And if we read the Puranas and even Mahabharata and other Sanskrit literatures, we know that Krishna has come in many avatars. Vishnu, Krishna. And it's interesting because one of the glories of India is that even if you go back thousands of years, India had religious freedom. It was always a cosmopolitan society, going back to the Rig Veda, which is practically the oldest book in any language. And no one really knows how old it is. The Western attempt to date it is a bit silly in some ways because it's based on all kinds of assumptions, which everyone knows are not really true. Well, actually, I'll tell you how they date it very quickly. The idea is that the old German Oxford Sanskritist Max Muller, he was just speculating on how old the Veda might be. And so to do this, he used a type of, he tried to give a certain chronology for language change. For example, if you look at any language in the world, whether it's Hindi, whether it's English or French or German or any language, we see that languages change over time. So, for example, we have the English of, let's say, Chaucer. We have the English of Shakespeare. We have Victorian English. We have modern English, which is rapidly becoming sort of a non-language. But anyway, so if you look at language change, so Miller, he looked at language change in various languages, and he said that from the languages he knew, languages tend to change at a certain rate. So if you look at Vedic literature, if you look at the original Vedic Samhitas, the Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva Vedas, if you look at the Brahmana literature, the Aranyakas, the Upanishads, and then, which are basically Shruti, and then you get the Puranas and the Itihasa like Mahabharata, Ramayana, and so on. And then when you get into the Itihasa literature and Puranas, even Bhagavad-Gita, you have what's called classical Sanskrit. And so there's language change. In fact, there's, you can get grammar books which are Vedic. Let's say that if you want to read the Rig Veda, and then there's classical Sanskrit. So he calculated that given the rate of language change in other languages, we can say that, let's say the Rig Veda Samhita was approximately this old, and then later we get this, and later we get that. Now, even he made it very clear. He said, actually, just paraphrasing, I don't have the slightest idea how old these literatures are. This is just sort of a wild guess. But the wild guess became sort of the Bible of Vedic chronology. And here's some problems with that. Number one, language is a manifestation of culture. Obviously, it's one of the key components of culture. And so we can see that different parts of the world culturally change at different rates. For example, India is practically the only civilization left on Earth which has basically retained a very ancient culture. And including its, the religious views. People thousands of years ago were worshiping Vishnu, and people still worship Vishnu. Whereas if you look, say, at Europe, you have the Greco-Roman civilization, which spread throughout Europe, and, they don't worship Zeus and Jupiter and Apollo anymore. And so there's been a complete change. Actually, the word Jupiter is Sanskrit, in case you're interested. Jew in Sanskrit is the sort of the stem word for divya, divine, Deva, and Peter, of course, his father. So Jew Peter, the father of heaven. But anyway, that's a very interesting topic. So in one sense, and this gets back to what I said, there's something very special and unique about Bharatvarsha, today called India. And that is that God chose that place to appear in this world. Krishna specifically says in Bhagavad-Gita, in verse 433, that Shreya Jnanamayad, Shreya Dravyamayad Yagya Jnana Jagya Parantapa. That better than worshiping God by rituals is worshiping God by developing your knowledge, by understanding the philosophy that Krishna himself taught. And then Krishna says, Sarvakilang Partha Jnane Parisamapyate. Sarvam Karmakilang, because all rituals, all activities ultimately are meant to lead to knowledge. So basically this idea of, no, just get the ritual right, no one cares what your philosophy is, it has practically decapitated Sanatana Dharma. And if you look at the Indian tradition, they have the greatest scholars in the world, the greatest philosophers. I mean, Shankara, whatever one may say, was a great intellectual. He was a very sophisticated thinker. Ramanuja. I mean, India has this glorious, unique, intellectual, philosophical tradition.